Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of history's great head-scratchers. How does a nation that's literally at war with itself, a country on the verge of total collapse, not only survive, but go on to defeat the combined might of Europe?
I mean, really think about this question. This is the exact situation facing the brand new French Republic back in 1792. It's broke. Its army is in absolute chaos. And to top it all off, the most professional military forces on the continent are invading. By any logic, France should have been crushed, wiped off the map.
And when we say impossible, we mean it. The situation was beyond desperate. France wasn't just fending off an invasion. Internally, it was being consumed by rebellion, political paranoia, and a total economic collapse. The entire revolutionary experiment was just hanging on by a thread.
But here's the really fascinating part. Both sides went into this thing completely delusionally confident. The French revolutionaries were fired up, preaching about a universal crusade to liberate all the oppressed peoples of Europe. They thought their new citizen soldiers would just sweep everyone away. Then you have the Allies, Austria and Prussia, and they were just contemptuous. They dismissed the French as an army of lawyers and literally told their officers, "Don't worry, this comedy will not last long. We shall be back home by autumn." Well, spoiler alert, they were both very wrong.
I mean, that army of lawyers comment, it wasn't that far off in terms of the chaos. The French army was a complete train wreck. It wasn't just broken, it was actively self-destructing. You had entire royalist regiments just up and defecting to the Austrians. In one skirmish, the troops didn't just run away, they turned around and murdered their own general. All of France's best, most experienced commanders had either fled or resigned. All you had left was an army of undisciplined, though very enthusiastic, volunteers who were often more trouble than they were worth, sometimes showing up to fight in little more than rags.
And yet, from the ashes of this absolute military disaster, something incredible happens, one of history's huge turning points. The revolution was saved by a single battle that was really less about military tactics and more about pure, stubborn will. Okay, so let's set the scene. The Prussian army, it seems unstoppable. They invade on August 19th. The fortress of Longwy falls. Then on September 2nd, the critical fortress of Verdun falls. This opens up a direct highway to Paris, and the capital, it just panics. This sparks the horrific September massacres, where mobs storm the prisons and slaughter over 1,000 people. It looked like the invasion, and the revolution was about to be over.
And then came Valmy. Now, this wasn't some grand battle of infantry charges. It was basically a massive artillery duel, fought in the mud and the pouring rain. We're talking over 20,000 cannon shots fired. You see, the one part of the old French army that hadn't totally collapsed was its professional artillery corps, and they just happened to be holding the high ground.
The whole battle came down to this one moment. A Prussian shell hits a French ammunition cart, and boom, a massive explosion. The French troops, who are already terrified, are about to break and run. But their commander, General Kellerman, stays cool. He raises his hat on the tip of his sword, holds it high, and just shouts, "Vive la nation! Long live the nation!" And somehow, it works. His men see him, they find their courage, they start shouting it back, and they hold the line.
What really mattered here was psychological. The Prussian commander saw this incredible display of resolve and, completely unnerved, he called off the attack. Militarily, you could call it a stalemate, but for French morale, it was a staggering victory. The famous German writer Goethe was actually there, and he immediately understood what had happened, saying that a whole new era of world history had just begun.
And he was right. This victory, small as it was, gave the revolutionaries in Paris the jolt of confidence they desperately needed. The very next day, they abolished the monarchy and declared the First French Republic. The revolution had survived. But this survival came at a terrifying cost back home.
Right, so to really understand how France pulled this off, we have to look at the brutality it was willing to unleash, not just on its foreign enemies, but on its own people. And that brings us to the region of the Vendée.
So while the army is fighting on the border, this massive civil war just explodes in the west of France. Now, this wasn't a revolt led by aristocrats. This was a popular uprising of deeply religious peasants. They were outraged by the Republic's anti-Catholic policies and especially by being forced into the army through conscription. For them, this new government felt way more tyrannical than the old king ever had. The scale of this thing was just horrific. By the time it was over, it's estimated that 170,000 Vendéan civilians and fighters had been killed. To put that into perspective, that's about 20% of the entire region's population, just gone.
And the Republic's response wasn't about reconciliation. It was about total annihilation. You had politicians like Bertrand Barrier standing up in Paris and calling on the government to exterminate this rebel race.
And they weren't just talking, they actually did it. The Republic sent out these things they called infernal columns, armies with explicit orders to burn villages, slaughter livestock, and kill anyone in their way. Their goal was to turn the Vendée into an uninhabitable desert. This was the dark, savage underbelly of the Republic's fight for survival.
Okay, so after nearly a decade of this relentless, brutal warfare, both at home and abroad, everyone in Europe was just exhausted. And so they finally stumbled into a fragile truce in 1802. It was called the Peace of Amiens.
Now, on the surface, this peace looked like a total French victory. Britain gave back most of the colonies it had captured and basically accepted that France was now dominant in Western Europe. But was this just weak appeasement? Or was it a clever gamble? Well, the British thought that by making peace, they could force France to honor other treaties that guaranteed the independence of places like the Netherlands. The idea was that they could then rebuild their influence there once the French left.
It was a whole strategy based on the traditional rules of European diplomacy. But here's the problem. France wasn't playing by those rules anymore. And the reason why the peace failed, well, it can pretty much be summed up in one name: Napoleon Bonaparte.
Britain's whole plan hinged on one simple thing, that Napoleon would withdraw his armies like he was supposed to. But he just refused. He kept his troops parked in the Netherlands and Switzerland in Italy. So Britain retaliated by holding on to the strategic island of Malta, which they were supposed to evacuate. And just like that, within about a year, the whole fragile truce falls apart and Europe is at war again.
And that really is the ultimate takeaway here. The Peace of Amiens was designed for a world with predictable rules of diplomacy, but revolutionary France, and especially Napoleon, had created a completely new game with new rules. So the question becomes, what do you do when your opponent just refuses to play the game? That question would define the next 12 years of conflict across the entire continent, what we now call the Napoleonic Wars.